My heart is heavy. Even as I speak to you this morning, our nation is still reeling from the chaos, violence, and vandalism that racked our Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on the very day the church observes the Epiphany of the Lord. And as our nation confronts the failures and vulnerabilities of our institutions, the people of God must be ever faithful to witness to the good news of love, life, and light in the midst of hatred, death, and oppression. Especially during the season of Epiphany, the season in which we set our focus on the appearing, the revealing, the unveiling of what is good and right and just. We must not be shy or silent in our resistance to the worst instincts of politics and nationalism. It is undeniable. What happened in our nation's capital is an undeniable part of the American story now. It happened. And I pray, Plymouth Church, that we accept that this is an indelible part of who we are now and renew our commitment to the urgent prophetic pursuit of a more perfect union for all. During the season of Epiphany, I invite us to seek out, to search what is being revealed. Seek out and search what light is being unveiled. Will you pray with me? Speak. Your servant is listening. Say a word that your people might hear and be transformed in the hearing. Amen. The story of the Magi, or wise men, is an iconic narrative for the Christmas season. I know because I had a 3-year run as a wise man in Christmas pageants during my middle school years. But along with the gospel stories of the baptism of Jesus, this story is also the principal biblical narrative for observing the day of Epiphany. That time of the year in which the church not only testifies that God made God's self known in Jesus, but also takes seriously the idea that God works in and through even the natural world to reveal God's self to us. And according to the Gospel of Matthew, which is the only gospel that recounts this story, these Magi, or wise men, or I like to call them stargazers, came to Jerusalem because they observed a star that apparently revealed to them that the true King of the Jews, the true King of God's people, had been born. These Magi, stargazers, wise men, had been captivated by God's glory in a star and were compelled to seek out the revelation. And now this story is so colorful and so readily recognizable that its true power and subversion are easily missed. And in our eagerness to get to the story, we run right over the gospel writer's setting of the scene with the opening in the time of King Herod. And while the conventions of storytelling require a colorful antagonist like King Herod, the truth is that there were many Herods over many years in ancient Palestine. Years of these kings tapped by Rome to be in charge of the people it conquered and the territory it occupied. And so I want us to settle there on this time of King Herod. And after what we saw in our nation's capital, I think it is worth us spending a little bit of this moment talking about the times in which God is seeking to be revealed, the times in which light needs to shine through. There is something about the time of King Herod that begs for a revealing or an appearing of God's presence, holiness, and glory. This is a time in which kings in charge are doing the bidding of the empire. And these kings in charge rule with an iron fist, oppressing, dominating, and exploiting some of the most vulnerable people. This is a time where dissent and resistance of any kind were met with slaughter, enslavement, or crucifixion. This is a time when tributes and taxes and tithes and offerings were mercilessly extracted to finance massive construction of military fortresses and Roman theaters and temples. This is a time when the religious elite and the temple were controlled and compromised and unable and unwilling to serve God's people. I hope we take note of the age in which these magi saw the presence of God. How does one open oneself to the presence of God when all around is shadow and death? Maybe that's why these magi were from a foreign land. Maybe they were the ones who could see the light, possessed with what one theologian has called a revelatory state of mind, open to something external to themselves, something not distorted by a brutal imperial system. These foreign priests, stargazers, magi, recognized the divine presence in a peasant child in a backwater town. That's some sight. And their audacious act of seeing and recognizing the holy in an unexpected place frightens and destabilizes the empire. Oh, to be sure, Herod saw them as nothing more than pawns in his game to secure and maintain his power. But their very act of seeking out Jesus to honor him as the King of the Jews leads them to take a stand in opposition to Herod. That's some sight. That is some sight. To walk into the middle of the time of King Herod and claim that God is appearing in some place other than the royal palace, that God is showing up in some place other than in the halls of power. These stargazers join the people of Israel in their prophetic discontent and resistance to empire. There is something about God's revelation that anticipates renewal and liberation. They saw something. That is some sight. And it is because of an epiphany that these priests had, these stargazers, these magi, these foreigners. It is this epiphany at the age of the pretenders to the throne, this time of King Herod is coming to an end. These priests from a foreign land are the ones to see that the birth of Jesus was God's way of instituting a program of renewal of Israel. That there is good news for God's people, good news for God's people who are awash in oppression, domination, and exploitation. There is something gloriously revealing about powerful people aligning themselves with the discontent and resistance of marginalized people over an imperial system. And perhaps this is the season that calls for an intentional search For where God's vision of renewal and liberation is being birthed, we are in need of an epiphany. Oh, I know epiphany is a challenging concept in any age, especially in our time. If I had to hazard a moniker to affix to the time in which we live, I have any number of troubling signs and failures and concerns from which to draw to describe it. The age of inequality, the time of autocracy, the age of the gun, the era of social media, the era of resistance and discontent, the age of alternative facts and fake news, the age of insurrection. Ours is a time awash in distraction and amusement that make it hard to allow ourselves to be reached by God's revelation, a time when we are consumed by politics, consumed by economics, consumed by grievance. There appears to be little attempt or capacity to recognize the movement of God. But you see, I have no doubt that all around us are holy moments, shining stars, miracles even. And yet, a revelatory state of mind eludes us. Oh, and I understand why. I feel it in my own life. It eludes us, especially when we're looking over our shoulders, trying not to allow racism or sexism or xenophobia to destroy us. It can be difficult to recognize holy moments when too many of us are so willing to be lied to so we can maintain the status quo, or so that we can hold on to just a little bit more privilege. It is challenging to be on the lookout for the movement of God when we are too busy searching only for that which blesses or privileges us individually. And yes, I know it must be hard to look out for God when so many of us are looking for food and shelter and medical care and justice. Oh, Epiphany challenges all of us to see God, to see the good, to see justice. I can feel it. I can feel someone asking, "Preacher, I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know where I should be. I don't know what to look, what to see." Perhaps sometimes the issue is less about what we've been looking for than about where we've been looking. In the last few days, we have seen what happens when people refuse to be open to the movement of God, refuse to be open to the movement of what is good and right and renewing. When vision is clouded by our worst instincts, those people who storm the U.S. Capitol, who let themselves be goaded into terroristic chaos, were looking for renewal and liberation in petty, diabolical political leadership. I submit to you, they were looking in the wrong place. They assumed that the Herods of our day would be their source of light and life. And so we must all be careful about where we seek revelation. If we are not careful, even in our righteous discontent and our persistent resistance to injustices of the world, have the potential to divert our attention from the movement of God in our midst. Don't let it happen. It is easy to miss the signs of change and wonder and newness because the empire has got us so preoccupied, so whipped up, and so fed up. I have no doubt that there are holy moments and shining stars, miracles even. But if there is any doubt about what is being revealed, know that the things of God do not countenance cruelty, hatred, or revenge. The revelation of God will not be found in the oppression and domination of another. Herod's murderous intentions were thwarted because these wise ones remained open to a holy moment and would not look in the halls of power. It may be that the reason far too many of us are unable to have that revelatory state of mind is because, unlike the Magi, we have assumed that the things of God cannot be revealed among the poorest, most vulnerable people among us. Our culture and economy have conditioned us to assume that God is only pleased to dwell or reveal God's self in the spectacle of power, empire, and grandeur. Oh, I invite us to linger just a little longer with those relegated to the margins, to stay a while with those who are dominated and oppressed and exploited. For among them, perhaps God has something to reveal. I hope we do not avert our gaze too quickly from the cells of the ICE detention center, for it may be there, amid discontent, that God may be incarnated. I hope we do not dismiss the anger among the Black Lives Matter protesters too quickly. It may be there, amid the resistance to business as usual and the killing of unarmed Black people, that God may be revealing God's self in some way. I hope we do not turn away from the poor, the hungry, or the prisoner, for it may be among them that God is revealing good news to the world. During this season of Epiphany, I pray that we are blessed with that revelatory state of mind, that we let ourselves be pulled and beckoned always to keep our hearts and minds open to the movement of what is good, loving, and just. This is a season of revealing, appearing, unveiling. And though death and shadow may surround us, I pray that we continue to look for the signs of glory. I pray that we will search out for what God may be trying to say. As I was looking at all of the bad news, I was reminded of a seminal moment in the movie Color Purple. It's a movie with a lot of darkness and sadness and hurt and oppression. But in that seminal moment, there's a testimony when a rejected daughter burst through the doors of the church to confront her unforgiving father. And they are all singing that God is trying to tell you something. God is trying to tell you something. Oh, if the people of God would hear and see, what light might be revealed. Amen.